you. Thanks you guys for coming. It's better turn out this time, so I'm excited. My name is Jenny. I'm from Anchorage. We have an office right on Lake Hood. BWI is a local broker. We sell many different types of products. Hear me now? Sorry about that. Usually I just talk loud. Anyway, so we're a broker that we sell aviation insurance, all kinds of aviation insurance, from general aviation, commercial policies. We do a little bit of CFI non-owned, which is a new product of ours. We work with the Alaska markets, which is not a great, there's not a lot of competition up here for Alaska products. So there's several carriers that we go through, about a handful of them right up here. Got a carrier called US Specialty. They do a lot of business in Alaska, from commercial to GA. They also have options for seaplanes, skis, helicopters, you name it. And we have a company called Old Republic, also becoming very competitive in Alaska. They do sell seaplanes, skis, various coverage changes. There's a carrier called London Aviation. They're really great for like new pilots, transitional pilots, commercial policies. Some of you, if you have any commercial insurance, may know about that carrier. They've been around here for a while. There's another carrier called USAIG. They look for really experienced pilots. So they like high time guys with lots of tail wheel time or an IFR, that's sort of their preference. Every carrier has their own preference, right, of what they want to write. They have like an appetite of the type of insurance and risks that they're looking for. So depending on your specific need, what I'm here to do is help you sort of navigate those markets, right? So you come to me with your whatever aircraft you have or specific risk, maybe you're looking just for some non-owned to start doing instruction or something like that. And then I kind of get a feel for what you need and find the right carrier for you. So it's not always about the most competitive premium, but also about the terms that you need for your specific scenario. So that's what a broker does. The company, a little background about BWI, has been around for a while. Originally started in 1977. Bill White Insurance is what we stand for. Bill is a 185 pilot, and he started a company in Corona, California in '77 because he kind of wanted to give back to his community. He had a little bit of an insurance background already, but then got into aviation. Eventually started writing business through our 180, 185 program, which I know a lot of you know about. Unfortunately, right now, we can't underwrite that in Alaska, just because of the carrier that we work with through that company. They don't do business up here. We're working on pushing for more types of programs like that. But Bill originally started that program, so it's kind of our baby. He eventually sold the business to his son, Matt, in 2016. And then in 2019, we opened our Lake Hood office in Anchorage. There's such a huge aviation community here that, we really wanted to have a physical presence in Alaska, where you can actually come in, talk to me, get quotes in the office, stop by and drop off a payment, whatever. But of course, 2019 and 20, the pandemic occurred, and the office wasn't open for very long before we had to shut it down. And so in 21, I came on board. My background was P&C stuff mostly, which is like life, home, auto, snow machines, boats, four-wheelers, whatever. And so I worked for 12 years in that industry, and I ran a little agency in Anchorage for about 6 years, and then came on to the aviation side of things, which kind of the best move for me because it's so much fun. I mean, I know you guys know there's so much to learn and it's exciting. So I started doing aviation insurance in 21, and I've been running the office in Anchorage since. What else can I tell you about us? We're basically, I think, really competitive on a lot of things, depending on what you're looking for. And we have a lot of options for different coverage levels. I'm around full time, so our office is actually seasonal. We close down like early November because it gets real slow around late, but we'll open up back early March. And so I'm always available by appointment. However, even during the off season, you can still come by the office and see me, give me a call, schedule a time to do that. So one of the things I really wanted to do this year with you guys, last year you came to my speech, my presentation was sort of about bridging the gap, right? So we have such a huge aviation community here, and so many people are self-insuring, right? They're going uninsured because the prices are high. And I recognize this, and I want to try and do what I can to push for the right coverage levels, but also premiums that keep you, in business if you're running commercial stuff, or if you're, trying to earn your commercial and just build time, right, and get into, just the business side of things for aviation. It's a hard process because of insurance, and I get a lot of feedback from my insurance that, the more these insurance rates increase, the harder it is to operate our businesses, right? So what can I do to help keep me in business? And part of what I've done recently is been working with underwriters to give us storage options, which is like coverage level changes midterm, right? When you're looking at a commercial, let's say, seaplane operation, running like a sightseeing tour, those policies can be upwards of like 25, 30K a year. But a lot of those planes are not operating on a year. And so for the longest time, we were getting feedback from underwriters that it's just the 20, 30K annual, and that's what it is. You can't change it, you can't remove your floats to save money, you can't drop coverage levels down. And so I've been really pushing for some options, especially for the commercial stuff. We can do this for GA stuff too. If you're not flying all year round, I can save you minimum probably $500 a year by having some of these coverage level options. And for a commercial operator, even more, right? Because their premiums are so high that when you drop your aircraft down to storage, it can save you a couple thousand a year. So that's something that we didn't always have, but listening to your feedback, I've been pushing underwriters to give us more of these options, keep us flying, keep us in business, right? Keep things competitive with other carriers. And so we've kind of made a little headway in that. Also, I think I mentioned the CFI non-owned policies. Up until about 2 months ago, we didn't even have an option for non-owned at BWI. The only real option was through a company called Avemco. Avemco's separate, right? You go right to the source when you go to Avemco. They underwrite and service their own policies. But they don't do a lot of, they do a lot of business in Alaska, but they don't insure every type of risk, right? And so, as a broker, again, we're taking your information and shopping the market for you. But we didn't have a market for non-owned insurance at all for like about 5 years or so, 3 or 4, 5 years, something like that. It's been a while. And so just recently we got some really competitive carrier to offer non-owned CFI or just regular non-owned policies. And actually pretty competitive comparatively when you look at the prices that people are getting non-owned CFI coverage down in the States. So it's an exciting new product, first of all, but it's also another step in the right direction to try and get more underwriters to realize what a market they have up here, right? And the different types of risk exposures that they may be more willing to make an offer on now that we've sort of started to expand some of the other things that we can do. So it's just about kind of getting out there, asking these questions of underwriters, talking to you guys, getting your feedback, hear what you need, and then I take that back to them and we have conversations about it. So I would like most of this presentation to be more about what you guys want to say, or ask me questions, what you want to hear or talk about, things that you're worried about with your own insurance, things you're looking for that maybe you can't find. And we'll take that feedback and give it to the underwriter, right? Give it to the many underwriters, have these conversations, see what they're willing to do. And today I actually have a special guest. This is one of my favorite underwriters through Old Republic. His name is Aben Sethi, and he's here to do a little bit of Q&A with us. He does a lot of 180, 185 insurance for me. He's very competitive on that stuff, and we can do floats with Old Republic. We can do storage with Old Republic. So they have a lot of coverage options that I think Alaskans find valuable, and with all of the 180s and 185s flying around here, he's a great market for it. So I kind of want to open up to you guys and see, you have questions for us? What can we tell you? What can we answer for you? Is there anyone who wants to start off with a question? There you go.
I do most of my flying in the lower 48. but my home address is Alaska.
Yeah.
And so when I ask for insurance, they ask, where do you live? Alaska, in my raising dog.
Yeah.
Is there a way to say that my aircraft is based somewhere and insure where it's based rather than knowing where I take up my day home?
Sure. Yeah.
Is it anything on that?
And we'll talk to Aben about this one too, but from my experience, that address signals an underwriter Alaska risk. And while maybe you are not here year-round, most carriers would prefer that even if you are here, let's say you're a snowbird, you're only up here for 3 months out of the year, the rest of the year you're down in Arizona or whatever, they still will rate that as an Alaska risk. But one thing we can do is tell them it's based out of state, give them that base airport of where you're at for the remainder of the year, and sometimes premiums can be adjusted by that. I mean, no matter what, an Alaskan policy is more expensive than anywhere else down in the States, right? For sure. And so when you have that Alaska exposure, you're still subject to those prices, but sometimes I can offset it a little bit by changing the airport. And it's always a good idea to tell your underwriter anyway where you're basing your aircraft at. We want to know, even if it's being moved for a few months, just let us know. Sometimes it's just a matter of noting it to them so they know where your base airport location is and maybe your alternate base airport. But occasionally it does help with premiums, so it's good to talk about if you're broker or agent.
Maybe a follow-on question.
Okay.
I fly gliders.
Uh-huh.
In my group, it's the Soaring Society of America.
Mm-hmm.
And their underwriter is not the USDA, it's AN.
Okay.
Is that,
Uh-huh.
and they do not cover insurance in Alaska.
Right.
Is that?
See, they used to. They backed out of here about 5 years ago. That was the carrier that offered the non-owned coverage up here. So sometimes it's up to your underwriter's discretion how long you can be up here. Most of these policies do include Alaska as a covered territory. So it's common misunderstanding that that means you have Alaskan coverage. But they also include, the Caribbean, Mexico. That doesn't mean you're based there, right? And so AIG will cover you to fly to Alaska. I've had them authorize one of my insureds, like a 30-day permissive type of thing. Like, you go up there for a month, that's okay.
That's my follow-up question is, I can't fly my glider through that insurance policy, but my buddies can bring up their gliders and fly them. And be covered by the group insurance. And so there's a little bit of...
Yeah. Well, I think there may need to be some follow-up with the underwriters so they understand the risk, right? Because they're looking at each of these individually for the most part. What's your specific, what are you doing? Tell us more about it so that we know how to rate it. If they're flying up here annually for more than 30 days, it's probably not something AIG would want to continue to underwrite.
I think I just had a bad broker because he thinks I live in England and I can beat my boss. He's never been up here. And he says, well, you can't fix gliders in Alaska. He fixed Airbus and Boeing's and Piper's, etc. He fixed everything. But it's just my broker just thinks it starts bad at the broker. So with AIG, would that be something that you as an Alaskan broker could have that conversation and get me back into the group insurance?
Well, so because you're already insured through another broker, I actually can't really get in there and do much with it. They only work with one at a time. We are appointed through AIG. We've been writing through them forever. But in order for me to get in there and negotiate anything for you, or at least review your policy and help you sort of navigate that, you would have to sign it over to BWI because they will only work with one broker at a time. Well, too many hands in the pot confuses things, right? I mean, I'm happy to look at your policy and read it for you and help you interpret that. I'm always available for that kind of thing, even if you're not my insured, but I wouldn't be able to do much for you without signing it over. So, and, good thing to know, actually, a good point to bring up is you're the owner of the policy, right? you have the right to work with whoever you want. Just because you're with a broker now and maybe you don't like them, that doesn't mean you can't change that. But it doesn't change the terms, it doesn't change the premium or the coverage levels, it just changes who your servicing agent is. So there's a way to sign it over and do that and switch out your broker if you preferred someone local, for example, or just wanted someone else to thought maybe they weren't shopping around for you or whatever. You could do that at any time. You're not stuck with that agent forever just because they're the ones who currently have either the policy or the quote.
Well, I've never been able to get group insurance, so that's not a problem. Thank you, I used
Yeah.
to for my question.
Sure, no, that's great. Anyone else? Yeah.
What have you seen as far as ratings over the last couple of years?
That's a good question. It's actually getting a little better. I mean, we're not seeing decreases in premiums really up here, but when I started, some of the premiums were going up by like 25-30%, like year to year, and that's just crazy. I think what was happening is these insurance carriers were going through a rate revision, and they all kind of go through those things sort of simultaneously, but maybe different times of the year or whatever, and so your renewal would come up, and then all of a sudden, bam, your rates would go up 20% or whatever. And it's a hit, like all of a sudden, but that was happening to everyone across the board, not just in Alaska, even down in the States. But Alaska's prices being so much higher, it was a bigger hit for us. Now I'm finding that I'm still seeing these increases occur, but they've lessened. So it's more like, instead of 25% increase, I'm seeing maybe a $100 or $200 difference in premium year to year. The real win is if we could break even every year. Like if your rates just don't increase, stays the same as your renewal from last year, to me that's the win. And the way you do that is by making sure we're communicating every year at renewal. We're updating your hours, we're reviewing your coverage levels, making sure the aircraft is insured for the right value, and then we take all that information and provide it back to the underwriter. We shop the market to make sure you're still getting a competitive rate, and that's the best way we can kind of offset some of these industry increases that we have absolutely no control over, right? These are happening whether we like it or not, and but it's getting a little better. So I think that's a good sign that maybe we're starting to, the pendulum's shifting a little. I don't know, none of my insurance policies ever decrease, for me personally, but the idea is to at least keep you about where you're at. If you're starting off as a low-time pilot, you're usually a little higher in premium for the first term. You kind of have to bite the bullet with the higher premiums until you've built up some time and experience, especially in the aircraft that's insured on the policy, right? Once you build up more hours, maybe you're flying a Super Cub and you got a bunch of tail dragger time in the last year, we want to make sure we're telling the underwriter that. So the lower time pilots probably have a better opportunity to see a decrease in premium once they build up their time year to year. But you're locked in at your pilot experience when you bind a renewal. So there's really no way to update that until the next year. So one of the things we do as your broker is we'll send out renewal emails asking you for hours. I'll call you up and say, hey, we're getting close to renewal. Let's make sure we're, presenting you accurately to the underwriter, because that can change your risk exposure and how they rate you, or it could. It's at least worth a shot. It certainly doesn't hurt. Unlike an auto policy, the more you fly your plane, the more proficient you seem, right? A better risk to the underwriter. So, yeah. Yes?
Your risk, however, is based on the lowest time pilot.
True, usually yes. Lower time pilots do drive up premium. So adding on someone who has more time, like your CFI, doesn't really help with the annual cost. It won't increase it, but it doesn't lower it either. Any questions for Aben?
I have another question.
Sure.
If someone has two aircraft, they insure one aircraft, they insure the other aircraft. Is there any reduction in insurance by having two aircraft assigned to one pilot?
So this is an interesting question. I get this a lot. There is a little wiggle room here sometimes. There's not like a specific multi-aircraft discount, for example, like you see on an auto policy, right? But what you can do sometimes is, some carriers will do a named pilots only clause, which they all have named pilots only in Alaska, right? Which means everyone who's flying needs to be listed and approved by the underwriter. But some carriers will give you a little bit of a credit and say, well, you got 2 planes here, we're gonna drop this premium down on this other plane a little bit, it's still full flight, you can still fly either one. But because there's only one pilot on there, we'll give you a little bit of a discount. Not all companies do that. I can definitely do that on like commercial policies. That was another real win last year for me. Was I had a young 20-year-old pilot who was starting up his own charter business and had a 206 and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head. But they're expensive planes to insure, and they gave him a little bit of a break in premium because he was the only pilot. On a commercial policy, it actually saved him quite a bit of money. It kept him in business, allowed him to buy that second aircraft for the backup, just in case he needed it in a pinch, you know, and he could just hop right in either one and fly either one at full flight. So it depends, and that's something that you kind of have to negotiate a little bit with an underwriter. It's not something they typically add in. And again, no discount, right? So even though you can only fly one plane at a time, you still have full flight on both aircraft, so they still charge you for that premium, usually, typically. Does Old Republic do anything like that?
You guys hear me?
Here you go.
You guys hear me?
Yeah, we can, the one option would be if you want to, like, put the other aircraft in ground mount and ocean coverage for the time being when you're not flying them. That could be done, and that's something that we can work with. That way, that will be for as well. If you do leave that full flight coverage, depending on what aircraft, which one of the two fly the most, we can kind of take a little bit of a discount on the second one. But like Jenny mentioned, it does have to be negotiated a little bit on when we are writing the deals that we float out. So your broker, Jenny, would reach out to me and let's have a conversation on that.
Everything is negotiable to an extent, right? And true with insurance too, we just have to have the conversation. And so, you know, that's my job, is to be your advocate. Again, listen to what you need and then try and see what we can work out as far as, you know, obviously premium is important, but your terms are important too, right? You want to have the coverage when you need it. We're paying a lot of money for insurance. It would be a shame to not have the right terms for your specific needs. So with Alaskan policies, it's not like a click and I get a quote online like with Progressive, right? We've got to, the two of us communicate, get on the phone with each other. We'll say, hey, let me look at this one. What exactly is going on with you need, right? And then I can give the feedback I received from you back to Aben, and then Aben goes, well, let me see what I can do, and then we'll work it out, right? You know, sometimes they're just firm underwriting guidelines that we can't get past, but it's always worth asking those questions and going right to the source and see what, you know, what can they do, what could they offer? And with our Alaska policies, I feel like that happens a lot more here than anywhere else, really, you know, in the States, especially with the general aviation stuff. There's more, it's more involved as far as the negotiation process and the underwriting process.
Another thing I would just add is, when usually it seems like, at least more recently, that Alaska policies are much more restrictive in terms of options, coverages, and limits. That's not necessarily always the case. We can look into options to see if there's some flexibility where we can negotiate with the broker, work with you to see if we can get as low as
you know? Yeah.
Actually, my understanding is loyalty is a pretty big consideration in the insurance world. That is a contemplated your position in terms of shopping market versus being loyalty.
You're reading my mind. I was just about to bring that up. Loyalty is very important, especially with our Alaskan markets. I have carriers that if you left them at renewal for cheap premium, they just won't quote you again. They'll be like, no, that's okay. We don't need it. It's fine. A lot of my insurers don't quite understand how that relationship works. They really do want to have you stick around long term. You know, Aben wants to write something that's not going to cancel in a year, right? Obviously. But this is kind of true with all insurance, even your home and all that. You build up this longevity of the policy, and if there's ever a loss, right? First thing your underwriter is looking at it, the next renewal is, well, how long have we had this person for? Has it been with us for a while, or we have a relationship with this person, and that can actually impact your renewal, right? Because whether we like it or not, when we file a loss, we file claims, your insurance goes up at renewal. And in Alaska, quite a bit. And so sticking with the carrier long term that you think you can ride it out through, even if there was a loss, is really the best option for you. And that's another thing that I'm trying to do too, right? I don't want to put you with the cheapest one. I want to know what you're going to do in 10 years from now, right? Are you going to be 70 years old in 10 years from now? We need to find someone that you can stick with throughout your 70s that will keep you at a good rate. That's not going to make you, go do, instruction that you don't want to do. I get guys back to school, at some point, 5 people only at some point, and that's up to the discretion of the insurance carrier. Not all of them will do it. So that longevity is super valuable, especially with our markets here. Yeah. But I do shop you around, right? Because that is my job, to make sure that you're getting competitive rates. But that's one of the things we discuss when I do find these other options for rates. Well, this might be a little cheaper, but you've been with Older Valley for 6 years. That's nothing to beat that. Think about if that is valuable to you as well. If I'm looking at it and yeah, you probably would stick with Old Republic otherwise, because, they're offering what you need even if it's the coming years, then maybe it's not worth saving a couple bucks to change the carrier. If you move to a different carrier, then they drop you because you had a claim. Well, that doesn't be any good. And now you have a claim, and in aviation, that's on your record for 5 years. The red line, right? There are a lot of companies that wouldn't even consider you for a new business quote if you've had a loss in the last 5 years. And sometimes it doesn't even matter what happened. Like maybe it was a mechanical issue. Maybe you landed that plane and saved everybody's life in it, but still had a loss, right? And that can be considered. There are some companies that's just a hard no. And any losses in the last 5 years, hard no. Sometimes we can go to them and explain the loss. I've got lots of underwriters like Aben, and there's a couple others where you just get them on the phone and you explain to them like how this loss occurred, what was paid out, when it happened. And they might consider, right, to start you off as a new business insurer. But if you switch it to a carrier that you didn't have longevity with, it is more likely that your rates would be a lot higher, and it could potentially drop you at renewal, and now you can't find anything else. And then you have to self-insure, which is not ideal, obviously, right? Yeah, it's important. Yes.
But one thing to know that when I sort of through being a brokerage, or I failed to close, my spouse had an accident, and I am not here.
Yeah.
And it's
That's a tough one.
which is affecting me. And I think even if he no longer buys that plane,
Right.
I cannot be insured because I was penalized.
Yeah. It'll follow the plane too. Was it in the same aircraft?
Okay.
Were you trying to insure the aircraft that had the loss? Yeah, it can follow the plane too, the pilot and the plane. That's a tough one. Even because, ideally, what I would prefer is that we exclude that pilot, right? And then we rate you. But even with the aircraft having a loss, I'm sure that loss would still be considered. Would you agree?
I haven't seen too many in this type of situation. We denied writing somebody because their spouse had a claim. But it's something that I can look into, see what the process is.
But in terms of like assets, if the, you know, couple has claims in their names, because that's like an asset.
Right.
That seems like it was.
And it
You know,
does.
like excluding the person from the, ownership, you know, from operating staff, right?
It does fall on the rest.
So here's a question, how would it work with, I had two questions actually. How would it work if she were to put that into a trust? And then in that place, could you just assure her as a particular pilot, let's say a business or a trust for to own that particular airplane? And then he's a holder of the trust, that would be one question. And then the second question, I guess I could follow up with the second, because that was a little different, but just certain price, make sure you're not wrong.
Yeah. Aben, how do you feel about trust?
Owning the aircraft or business owning the aircraft.
This is one that's a good question, actually.
I think it's more about, I think that it would be more about the pilot that's flying. So it's something that, I guess that I haven't come across such a question, but I would say that, my first and foremost, I would be a pilot, flying airplane. And that's how I would really, at least from pilot experience. But yeah, if there is a claim, and then if you see it on, based on the aircraft, you know, I'll let that's something that I just don't want to give a wrong answer.
Right.
Yeah, it's up for negotiation.
Well, so actually, what would be my second question, because my first thought when she said this was, well, what happens if they sell the aircraft, so someone follows the aircraft? What if she were to sell that aircraft, or purchase a new aircraft? Is that still going to hinder her ability to potentially get that? Because now it's a new aircraft, and maybe she can be the husband off of it, not necessarily the aircraft, but off of the policy. So I guess it kind of follow up to that. But the thing is, if you get rid of that aircraft, follow it. Or if you were to sell the aircraft to business.
Right.
You don't technically own it, if she would be employed with business is fine. So now you can just bring her and not her husband. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Right.
Like, I was trying to find a loophole for her, but I'm wondering if you sell the aircraft and get a new aircraft, also, does that change it, you know, if you were to get rid of this, would that make a difference?
It could.
Okay.
As long as your husband is not on it, then you're the only pilot that's on it.
Well, underwriters are always asking me who owns things, right? That's a big, big question. Because lots of people, especially up here, we get a lot of people who have stuff under an LLC, and the owner is another LLC, is being leased back to an LLC, like, this happens all the time. And so they start digging around, right? Let's figure out who owns the LLC, are they pilots? I have, not up here, but I've heard of carriers having issues with trusts, right? And so some carriers won't write a trust if it's the owner of the aircraft. But most of them just want to know who owns it, right? Who's under the trust, who's going to be your pilot, and this kind of goes back to, it's all about negotiation, right? You have to give them all of that information. I'm not sure if the loophole would really work though, because they're still going to say, if he's on it, they're still going to find out that. But that's where I would push to exclude.
You can file in Wyoming, because I think Wyoming is still the only state that does not show who the record owners are or the LLC. So you can technically file in Wyoming under an LLC, does not show who the members are.
Right, but your underwriter still wants to know that information.
Yeah,
There's probably,
and they over 80%, even, you know, push their price fine, and they sponsored underwriters.
And some of them might be a hard
Yeah,
pass.
they were like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, even if he's not listed as a pilot, we won't insure you.
This
He'll
is-
get fined.
Yeah, this is something I would get on the phone with an underwriter and try and negotiate it. There are occasions where we have owners who are pilots and they aren't listed on the policy as a named pilot, but that's because I've negotiated that with the underwriter and explained the situation. With a pilot who has a loss, that might be a little more challenging to actually accomplish. So like, for example, I get student pilots who, I had just one the other day as a father-son. Dad was a student, son is working on his commercial. And so dad bought the planes so son can go build time for his commercial, right? But he's not qualified to fly that plane, and nor was he planning on it. It was for the kid. And so in that scenario, I was able to negotiate that. Yeah, he's a student pilot, but he's not going to be flying this just for the son. But that's where you go to your underwriter and just explain it, right? But the loss history, that's such a red flag in this industry that it might be a little bit more challenging. I'm happy to take a look at it and at least try. We can talk about it with a couple of underwriters and see what they say. Now, AOPA goes through Assured Partners, and Assured is a brokerage also, and they're appointed through the same carrier. So we go through London, right? I mentioned them earlier, but we can always try, Aben, depending on the aircraft. Old Republic has an appetite for sort of newer aircraft, so nothing older than 66, right?
We're willing to take something older, it's not,
Yeah.
not like vintage.
Yeah.
As far as, if they're like, 1960s.
Okay, see, that's another thing that's evolved, because in the previous years, they would decline that.
Can you pull the mic closer?
We can't hear the answer.
Can't hear you. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, keep your mouth closed.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, where were we? We're talking about declining the,
Age of aircraft.
oh, the age, yes. Yeah, it's another thing that's evolved, really, because, the previous years, like a 65 or older, Old Republic wasn't quite interested in that, at least up here, not everywhere. But there you go. I mean, it's just a matter of talking with the underwriters and seeing if they're willing to offer something else. Alaska being underwritten completely different. So you just never know what you can come up with. Yeah. Anyone else? Sure. Oh, yes. Yeah, go for it.
This question is about liability insurance.
Okay.
And how do I zero in on liability insurance? My situation is, our family is 2 pilots, 3 airplanes, no emergency. And I don't want to be overinsured and be lost in the target. I don't want to underinsure over the loss and it's too bad.
Mm-hmm.
How do you determine what's common?
There's kind of an industry standard of $1 million. You get $1 million total, 100,000 each passenger. This is also up for negotiation, so it kind of depends on the carrier or like why you need it. Sometimes, there's a lot of guys that will do, will fly around like videographers for some sort of Alaska project, right? Would it increase it? Angel flight, if you went and for construction?
No.
Oh, it's a volunteer, okay, gotcha. You might be able to. Some carriers are willing to go up to like 2 million. I've had people be required 5 or 10 million, depending on what they're doing. And it's up to the underwriter if they're willing to offer it or not. Some do, some don't. Commercial policies typically have a little higher liability limits, and companies like London work with us on that usually. It depends. And they also kind of want to know why you're asking for it, right? So we'll say, well, you're going to go do, this and that project, and, maybe you need to add on an additional insured too because they're making you do it. That's something they could consider. What's the highest you can offer for liability?
So the ones that I like mostly are 1,700,000.
Yeah.
But I know we do some quota share as well, if they're kind of stepping into that area, so. There might be some potential final liability on the as a quota share.
Mm-hmm.
But right now we're sticking to 1,700,000.
Yeah, and so some carriers just have that underwriting guideline, right? And even if we needed the coverage to be higher, they might not be able to offer it, which is then where we probably would take it and see, hey, would London be interested in offering the liability limits you're looking for? Would shop them? Yeah. You had another question? Sure.
I was going to ask about the CFI, non-that is construct in someone else's airplane.
Yes. Good to know that I mentioned earlier, named pilots only clauses. All of these policies in Alaska require you to list a pilot, any pilot, including your CFI. You've got to at least have them approved. And so I always advise my CFIs who are looking for non-owned, that's to protect yourself, right? That's if you get sued for something that happens. The primary policy is the aircraft policy, that comes into play first. So you definitely, it's in everyone's interest that the CFIs get approved on that primary aircraft policy first, and then carry that non-owned as a protection for their own liability while instructing. Non-owned policy, like I said, not a bad premium, but it's still an additional cost. I think for $1 million worth of coverage at minimum, though, it's probably worth it, considering the risk exposure it is, instructing. So, yes.
Just want to ask about aircraft categories, helicopter, glider, airplane, and also airworthiness categories, experimental.
Yeah.
How does that, there's a lot of different airplanes, and many are experimental, amateur build or experimental expedition. And of course, we have helicopters, we have gyrocopters, airplanes. So how broad are you for the aviation market? Ultimately, too.
Yeah, we can do all of those things. But stuff like helicopters, experimentals, those come with pretty high premiums. Unfortunately. It depends on the experimental, but there's a smaller market for those types of aircraft. Not everyone will take them, especially up here. The legend that's out there, I can do any kind of experimental Cub, usually have no problems with. But when we start getting sort of less common experimentals, maybe the issue is there's not enough that similar aircraft in our area for replacement parts, or someone who can, maintain it or whatever. Underwriters will take that into consideration, and so sometimes there are just some experimentals that I can't find a market for, but not all. So get a Cub, I guess, because those ones I can find, but they're expensive premiums a lot of times because the Cubs themselves are more expensive, right? They're newer, their haul volumes are higher, which significantly impacts the premium, and also the fact that we really only have like 2 carriers that will even look at them. And so you get sometimes kind of stuck with a company because that's the only option you have. So, then that's when we start negotiating maybe some coverage options for you. Like, hey, you store it during the winter, or, I don't think you want to go liability only on an expensive new experimental, but that would be an option too. So, well, we're about to run out of time. We'll take 2 more questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, you have 49 to 1%.
Okay.
Wheels, speech,
Yes. Okay. It depends on the carrier. There are many factors that we are looking at when we're underwriting a risk, right? Your location, obviously, that's what we've been talking about. But pilot, aircraft, the coverage you want, right? So, liability on something like that, I've seen a float plane liability policy about, maybe 2,500 or so. Something on wheels would be less than that, maybe a 1,200 range, something like that. But when you add that sea exposure, it does increase premium. So I'm giving you some pretty broad ballparks. Of course, we could take a look at it. But not all companies will offer liability only. And so depending on your risk exposure, you might only be, if that's the coverage you wanted, you might only be able to go through, like, Old Republic will do liability only, US Specialty will do it. Sometimes London will do it. They don't really like to, but I can talk them into it most of the time. So if you're meeting all of those other underwriting guidelines, and we can get you in with them, then you can probably find, some competitive liability being the cheapest coverage you can get. Yeah.
With the big concern.
Yes.
Any questions?
Well, there was one more, but if you want, I can meet up with you afterwards and answer. But we have our booth here at the Reagan Hall, right in the front. So if anyone else has more questions, feel free to come by and talk to us.
One thing I mentioned when I was introducing WebCat, I forgot to mention is that if you were interested in Wings credit or want to sign up for the Wings program, there's a sign-up sheet on the table back here. So look at every meeting clearly, magically, and we're going to give those to the FAA, kind of the gathering. They will either have Wings become already to the credit, If you don't have one, I'll sign you up. You can start getting a notice.
Like your name, and then I'll give them, and I like your name,
Email it.